The sun had already slipped behind the low skyline of Arlington, Virginia, leaving the air tinted with the soft orange haze of dusk. Marcus Hale adjusted the strap of his worn duffel bag and stepped out of the grocery store parking lot, the kind of place where no one paid attention to anyone else. A quiet evening, ordinary, unremarkable, until he heard the sound. A woman's voice, sharp, panicked. Then the distinct thud of a struggle. Marcus turned his head instinctively. 2 rows down, near a flickering light post, a young woman was being dragged toward a car. Her purse dangled from one hand. The other clawed against the attacker's grip. Without hesitation, Marcus moved. His training didn't ask questions. He dropped his bag and crossed the distance in seconds. "Hey!" His voice cut through the noise, low, firm, commanding. The man turned, startled. Marcus's hand shot forward, a swift defensive maneuver he'd used 100 times before. The attacker stumbled back, lost balance, and hit the pavement. The woman broke free, gasping for breath. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked, extending a hand. She nodded, trembling, clutching her phone. "Call 911, he said gently. She did, and that, Marcus would later realize, was when everything went wrong. By the time the first patrol car screeched into the lot, Marcus was still kneeling beside the unconscious assailant, checking his pulse, Marine habit, ensuring no one died on his watch. The red and blue lights flashed across his dark skin and the sweat-soaked Marine Corps sweatshirt he wore. To Officer Derek Nolan stepping out of his cruiser, it looked like a crime scene, and Marcus looked like the criminal. "Hands up!" Nolan shouted, drawing his weapon before Marcus could even turn. Marcus froze, confused. "Officer, I said hands up!" Nolan barked, voice rising, finger tightening on the trigger. The young woman tried to speak, still shaken. He helped me. He's not—" "Ma'am, step back!" Nolan snapped, not hearing her over the pounding in his ears. Marcus slowly raised his hands, calm but weary. "Sergeant Marcus Hale, United States Marine Corps. Retired. The guy on the ground attacked her." "Drop the act," Nolan hissed, circling closer. "Turn around." The woman moved forward, desperate. "He saved me." "I called you, but—" Another officer grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, please step back." Marcus sighed, eyes steady. "You're making a mistake." "Get on your knees," Nolan ordered. For a moment, the whole parking lot held its breath. The flickering light, the hum of a distant siren, the tension between 2 men, one carrying authority, the other carrying history. Then, somewhere nearby, a phone camera clicked on. A young journalist named Nina Brooks, just leaving the store, began recording, drawn by the sight of a gun pointed at a man who hadn't moved a muscle. Her voice, trembling, whispered into the mic, "He's not resisting. He's a veteran." And as Marcus lowered himself to the ground, palms open to the concrete, he looked up at the night sky and thought, "I've seen this before. Different battlefield. Same war." The flashing blue and red lights painted the parking lot like a warning sign. Officer Nolan's voice barked orders into the radio, words sharp and breathless. "Suspect detained. Possible assault. 1 victim. 1 unconscious male on scene." His tone carried the confidence of someone certain he'd done the right thing. But Marcus Hale, kneeling on the asphalt with zip ties biting into his wrists, knew how quickly certainty could collapse into chaos. He didn't struggle, didn't speak, didn't even look up. Years of training had taught him one thing. When a man with a gun mistakes control for authority, silence is your only armor. A few meters away, Nina Brooks held her phone steady, filming every second. The image on her screen was surreal, a veteran subdued by police, while the woman he'd saved shouted at them to stop. "He's not the attacker," she cried, tears streaking her cheeks. "He helped me. That's him on the ground, the real guy." But no one listened. Another officer, Sergeant Miller, pulled her back, muttering, "Ma'am, let us do our job." The scene unfolded in layers of misunderstanding. The unconscious assailant was handcuffed, loaded onto a stretcher, and taken away. The victim was escorted aside for questioning, and Marcus, the man who had done everything right, was pushed into the back of a cruiser like he was the villain in his own story. Inside the police car, the world outside blurred into streaks of light. Marcus stared at his reflection in the window. Calm, expressionless, but inside something heavy twisted. He thought about the dozens of times he'd diffused tension overseas, where misunderstanding could get men killed. Funny, he murmured under his breath, how fast peace feels like a battlefield. At the same time, Nina uploaded her clip online with a simple caption. This man helped a woman escape an attacker and got arrested for it. Within minutes, it spread. Within hours, it exploded. By midnight, "I'm a Justice for Hale" was trending across social media. News outlets picked up the story. Black Marine veteran mistaken for criminal in Arlington arrest. The footage looped endlessly. Nolan's gun drawn, Marcus on his knees, the woman's desperate pleas. It wasn't violent, but it was raw, the kind of image that said everything without needing explanation. In the small police station, Officer Nolan leaned over the interrogation table, still trying to justify the chaos. You matched the description. I didn't have time to ask questions, he said. Marcus met his gaze, calm but unyielding. You had time to aim. For a moment, silence filled the room. Not anger, not fear, just the cold weight of truth. Nolan looked away first. Hours later, Marcus was released without charges. The statement was bland. Procedural misunderstanding. No apology, no handshake. Just paperwork. But outside the station, floodlights glared. Reporters waited, microphones raised. And behind them, veterans, activists, strangers, holding signs that read honor, not fear. As Marcus stepped into the light, still wearing the same sweatshirt that now carried the stains of asphalt, a reporter asked, Mr. Hale, do you have anything to say about what happened tonight? He paused, looked straight into the camera, and spoke softly. Not as a victim, but as a soldier who'd seen too much to hate anymore. I served this country to protect people, all people. Maybe tonight was just another mission. Only this time the enemy wasn't out there. He was in How We See Each Other. That clip, just 12 seconds long, became the headline by morning. By the next sunrise, the world already knew his name. Marcus Hale, Marine veteran, hero turned suspect, had become the face of another painful truth America didn't want to face. That even a uniform could not always protect the man wearing it. The video from the parking lot had surpassed 10 million views. Talk shows debated his story. Hashtags multiplied. Some called it a tragic misunderstanding. Others called it proof. Marcus didn't read the comments. He sat at his small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee, watching the morning news replay the same footage, over and over, his image frozen mid-kneel under the flickering parking lot lights. His phone buzzed nonstop. Old friends, fellow Marines, reporters. He ignored most until one call came through marked, Private Line, Department of Defense. Marcus Hale? A voice asked. This is General Avery Locke from the Pentagon. I saw the footage. Marcus's tone was calm. Guess the whole world did. I served in Iraq, Locke said quietly. Men like you don't get forgotten. You saved someone's life last night, and you got treated like a criminal. That's not something we can let slide. That afternoon, the press surrounded the precinct where Officer Derek Nolan worked. He hadn't been seen since the arrest. Reporters swarmed the building, shouting questions, lights flashing. The department spokesperson released a short statement. The officer involved has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Nina Brooks, the journalist who'd filmed everything, was now on every major network. I didn't plan to start anything, she told a host. But I couldn't stand there and pretend it wasn't happening. Meanwhile, Marcus's modest apartment had turned into a temporary headquarters for media and supporters. Veterans dropped by, black, white, Latino, all sharing the same grim nod that only soldiers give one another. They forgot what we stand for, one said quietly. You remind them. That evening, Marcus finally stepped outside for the first time since his release. Dozens of people lined the street holding candles. A woman approached him, the same one he'd saved. Her name was Rachel Miles, and she hadn't stopped trembling since that night. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears brimming. I didn't know it would get this big. Marcus smiled gently. It's not your fault. The truth doesn't stay small. As darkness fell, the air filled with chants echoing down the street. Honor, not fear. Justice for Hale! Camera drones hovered overhead, capturing every moment. But Marcus's eyes weren't on the crowd. They were on a single black SUV pulling up behind the line of veterans. From it stepped General Locke, in full dress uniform, medals gleaming under the streetlights. The noise died almost instantly. He walked straight to Marcus and extended his hand. "Colonel Hale," Locke said, voice steady but firm. "You're coming with me." "The Pentagon wants to make this right." Marcus blinked. "I'm no colonel, sir. Just a sergeant who did the right thing." Locke smiled faintly. "Maybe it's time we reminded the world what doing the right thing looks like." The crowd parted as the two men walked side by side into the waiting car. Flashlights followed them, reporters shouted questions, and one final voice from the crowd called out, "You think this will change anything?" Marcus turned back just before the door closed. "Maybe not everything," he said softly, "but it's a start." And with that, the car pulled away, leaving behind the flicker of candles and the hum of a country that for once wasn't looking away. The convoy rolled down Constitution Avenue just as the morning light touched the marble of the Pentagon. For most people, this was an ordinary weekday. But for the handful of men in the car, and for the millions watching, it felt like history turning itself over. Marcus Hale, still dressed in the same faded sweatshirt from that night, stared out the window as the great gray walls of the nation's military heart drew closer. Inside, every hallway seemed to echo with the weight of unspoken apology. General Avery Locke walked beside him, his uniform crisp, his demeanor formal yet human. "They wanted to do this quietly," he murmured, "but I said no." "Quiet is how this keeps happening." Marcus gave a small nod. "I didn't ask for any of this, sir." "I know," Locke said, glancing at him. "That's why it matters." In the Pentagon press hall, cameras were already lined up. The seal of the Department of Defense stood behind a podium draped with both the American flag and the Marine Corps banner. A large screen displayed the headline that had overtaken every broadcast. "Racial Bias Incident Involving Marine Veteran Prompts Pentagon Response." When Marcus entered, the room went silent. He wasn't wearing medals or formal attire, just the quiet gravity of a man who had seen too much of life to be impressed by ceremony. General Locke took the podium first. "We are here to acknowledge not just an individual, but a failure. Ours," he said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. Sergeant Hale acted with courage and restraint in the face of danger. For that, he deserves honor, not handcuffs. He turned, gesturing for Marcus to join him. Flashbulbs popped. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, journalists, aides, even soldiers. Then it grew, rolling through the hall like thunder breaking tension. Marcus took the microphone reluctantly. "I don't stand here as a symbol," he began, his voice quiet but firm. "I stand here as a man who tried to help someone. I wore this country's uniform because I believed in its promise, and I still do. But belief doesn't fix what's broken. Only action does," reporters scribbled furiously. But Marcus's words weren't for them. They were for every person watching from their living rooms, every officer questioning their instinct, every citizen caught between fear and trust. Outside, a crowd had gathered near the Pentagon gates. Veterans, activists, families, people holding flags and homemade signs. Honor, not fear. Heroes don't come in one color. Meanwhile, in a small house across town, Officer Derek Nolan watched the broadcast alone. The image of Marcus standing before the Pentagon seal filled the room with a light that burned through his guilt. His badge lay on the table beside his sidearm. The department had suspended him, pending review. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then typed a single message to the precinct captain. "I want to make a statement. On record." At that same moment, Nina Brooks prepared her next report for national television. The footage of Marcus receiving acknowledgement from the Pentagon had already gone viral. "This isn't the end of a story," she said into the camera. "It's the start of an uncomfortable truth. America has always honored its soldiers, but now it must learn to honor its citizens the same way." That night, As Marcus walked out of the Pentagon surrounded by reporters and camera flashes, General Locke placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't just change a narrative," he said softly. "You forced us to face it." Marcus looked up at the fading daylight over Washington. "Facing it is one thing," he said. "Fixing it is another." And somewhere deep inside the Pentagon, amid polished floors and echoes of history, the applause still lingered like a promise. By the time night fell over Washington, Marcus's name had become a national debate. News panels dissected every word he'd said. Commentators argued about race, duty, and fear. Some called him a hero, others called it overreaction. But Marcus didn't care. He had never wanted fame, and he certainly didn't want to be a symbol. All he'd ever wanted was peace, and the right to be seen as a man, not a category. He sat alone in the Pentagon guest quarters that evening, still wearing the same sweatshirt from that night in the parking lot. The world now saw that piece of fabric as iconic, the same way soldiers saw battle flags. But for Marcus, it was just what he'd been wearing when everything changed. A knock came at the door. It was General Locke, holding a folder thick with printed statements. "The President's office wants to offer you an official commendation," he said. "A Medal of Civil Honor, public ceremony, full media." Marcus exhaled slowly. "I don't need medals, sir. I need them to stop pointing guns at people like me." Locke gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're not wrong. But symbols have power, Marcus. You're living proof." Across town, Officer Derek Nolan sat under the sterile light of an interrogation room. This time as a witness, not a cop. A federal investigator read through his report. "You discharged your weapon?" "No," Nolan said quietly. "But I wanted to. That's what terrifies me. I looked at a man trying to help and saw danger." The investigator studied him. "Then why come forward?" Nolan looked down. "Because if I don't admit it, I'll be part of the silence that almost killed him." Meanwhile, Nina Brooks's latest report aired live. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Tonight, Officer Derek Nolan broke his silence. He admitted bias in the moment of confrontation. This is not about guilt. It's about recognition of how deeply fear is woven into perception. The next morning, Marcus awoke to find thousands gathered outside the Pentagon. Veterans in full uniform, families carrying signs, children waving miniature flags. Cameras lined the lawns as the ceremony began. General Locke stood at the podium, his speech measured and solemn. "There are wars fought abroad and wars fought within. Sergeant Marcus Hale fought both, one with weapons and one with dignity." He turned and pinned a small medal to Marcus's chest, the Medal of Civil Honor, its silver glint catching the morning sun. Applause erupted. Marcus raised his hand slightly, asking for quiet. "I accept this not for myself," he said, voice resonant across the courtyard, "but for every person who's ever been misunderstood, profiled, or silenced. If this medal means anything, it's a reminder. Courage isn't just standing tall under fire. Sometimes it's staying calm when the world mistakes you for the threat." In that moment, even the loudest critics fell silent. Far away, in his apartment, Nolan watched the live broadcast. Tears welled up, unbidden. He whispered to no one, "I was wrong." Later that night, Marcus stood alone at the Lincoln Memorial. The city was quiet, its monuments bathed in soft gold light. He looked up at Lincoln's statue, the man who'd fought for a promise America still struggled to keep. The air was cool, heavy with reflection. Nina approached, camera lowered. "You could disappear now," she said softly. "You've already made history." Marcus smiled faintly. "History's not what matters. It's what comes after." The wind stirred the flags along the reflecting pool, and for the first time since that night in the parking lot, Marcus felt something unfamiliar. Not peace, but possibility. The kind of calm that comes when a man finally puts down a burden that was never his to carry. The weeks that followed were a blur of noise. Interviews, statements, headlines, speeches. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. Everyone had an opinion about what it meant. But for Marcus Hale, meaning had always been simple. He hadn't done it for attention or politics or symbolism. He'd done what Marines were trained to do, protect the innocent, even when no one was watching. Now, everyone was watching. The Pentagon turned his story into a campaign for public trust. New training programs, mandatory bias courses, joint task forces between veterans and police. Some praised it as reform. Others dismissed it as theater. Marcus kept his distance from all of it. He spoke when necessary, but he refused to be paraded. "I'm not your movement," he told one senator who tried to enlist him as a poster face. "I'm just a man who didn't walk away." Meanwhile, Officer Derek Nolan faced a departmental hearing. The footage of that night was replayed, frame by frame, analyzed like evidence from a war crime. Nolan didn't defend himself. When asked to speak, he simply said, "I saw a shadow where there was a man. I can't take that back, but I can face it." The board found him guilty of gross misconduct, but Marcus's own letter, submitted quietly, changed the outcome. It didn't call for punishment, and it called for accountability. "He made a mistake," Marcus wrote. "But if justice means anything, it must include the chance to learn from it." Nolan was stripped of his badge but reassigned to community reform work, training young recruits about situational awareness and racial bias. It wasn't forgiveness. It was consequence with purpose. Across the country, Nina Brooks's documentary, The Man in the Parking Lot, aired on national television. It didn't use narration, only real footage, soft music, and the haunting still frame of Marcus kneeling calmly under flashing lights. Critics called it the story America couldn't ignore. Awards followed, but Nina never accepted them publicly. "This story isn't mine," she said. "It belongs to the silence it broke." One morning, Marcus returned to the same grocery store parking lot. The cracked asphalt had been repaved, new lights installed. Near the spot where it all began, a small brass plaque was mounted on the curb. "Here." One man's courage reminded us that peace requires perception. He stood there a long while, hands in his jacket pockets, listening to the ordinary sounds, car doors, laughter, the rustle of shopping carts. For the first time in months, the world sounded normal again. As he turned to leave, an older white man approached. A veteran, too, judging by the Marine pin on his coat. "You don't know me," the man said softly, "but I watched everything. You carried all of us with how you stood that night. The uniform never really leaves you, does it?" Marcus smiled faintly. "No, sir. It just changes colors." Later that day, he received a call from General Locke. "We're forming a program," the general said. "Veterans assisting local law enforcement, training, mediation, prevention. We want you to lead it." Marcus didn't hesitate. "If it keeps another misunderstanding from becoming a tragedy," he said, "then yeah, I'm in." That evening, the sun dipped low over Arlington again. He walked home under a sky streaked with the same gold-orange hue as the night it all began. Only now, there was no fear, no confusion, only quiet resolve. He whispered to himself, almost smiling, "Different battlefield. Same mission," and as the light faded, the city moved on, not fixed, not healed, but maybe finally listening. The morning breeze carried a hint of early spring as Marcus stood outside a police academy in Richmond, Virginia. The sun was just beginning to rise, and with it came the faint hum of a new day, one not shaped by fear or anger, but by purpose. The program he and General Locke had designed was finally real. The HAIL Initiative, Veterans for Community Trust. It wasn't grand, it wasn't political, it was practical. Veterans, men and women trained in conflict resolution, patience, and pressure, now worked alongside cadets, teaching them to see before they react. Inside the gymnasium, young recruits in crisp blue uniforms sat attentively as Marcus walked to the podium. The lights were bright, the air thick with that blend of nervousness and hope that came with any first day. He didn't carry notes. He didn't need them. "I'm not here to teach you how to use your weapons," Marcus began. "You already know that. I'm here to remind you what happens before you reach for them." He paused, eyes sweeping over the room. "When I wore a uniform, we were told to identify the threat before engaging. But in civilian life, people like me are sometimes the threat before we even move." The moment you forget to see the human being in front of you, you lose more than control. You lose your purpose. A silence settled over the recruits. They weren't used to hearing this. Not from a soldier. Not from someone who'd faced both sides of misunderstanding. After the session, one young officer approached him, Officer Priya Desai, Indian American, fresh out of academy training. "Sergeant Hale," she said quietly, "my dad's a Marine, too. He always says the real war is learning to stay calm. You made me understand that today?" Marcus smiled. "Your dad's right. Staying calm saves lives." News of the program's success spread quickly. Departments from Chicago to Seattle requested training. Communities once divided began to find common ground. Not overnight, not perfectly, but visibly. Meanwhile, Officer Derek Nolan, now out of uniform, began visiting the same academies. He stood beside Marcus during sessions, not as a guest, but as living proof that redemption was possible. "I don't deserve applause," Nolan would say, "but I do deserve to make amends." Their partnership drew attention. The media dubbed them the Bridge and the Builder. Marcus hated the title, but he understood the symbolism. One man carrying the weight of pain, the other learning to build from it. Months later, at a national forum on policing reform, Marcus took the stage beside veterans, officers, and lawmakers. The room was packed, cameras rolling. "Justice isn't just about punishment," he said. "It's about understanding. It's about building bridges before the next tragedy makes us wish we had." When he finished, the applause was quiet, not explosive, but respectful, genuine. That night, as he walked through the nearly empty streets of D.C., Marcus looked up at the towering monuments. Lincoln, MLK, the memorials of wars fought long ago. Each one stood as proof that change was never fast, never easy, but always worth fighting for. His phone buzzed, a message from General Locke. "You did good, Marine." Marcus chuckled. "Still calling me that, huh?" he texted back. He stopped near the reflecting pool where the night sky mirrored perfectly in the still water. "Maybe," he murmured. "The fight's finally turning into something better." For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was carrying the country on his shoulders. He just felt like part of it, not above, not beneath, but right where he belonged. A year passed. The world had moved on, as it always did. New headlines, new crises, new faces to argue about. But the story of Marcus Hale never completely faded. It had become something quieter, deeper, a touchstone people returned to when the world felt too divided to mend. On a bright spring morning, the Arlington National Cemetery stood still beneath a pale blue sky. Rows of white gravestones stretched endlessly, their symmetry broken only by a small ceremony taking place near Section 60, where soldiers who'd fought the country's most recent wars rested. Marcus stood there, dressed in his Marine uniform once more. The years of rest hadn't erased the posture of command, nor the calm in his eyes. Today wasn't about him. It was Memorial Day, and he'd been invited to speak not as a symbol of controversy, but as a veteran who'd served, stumbled, and still chosen to believe. Before him sat a crowd, families of fallen soldiers, recruits from the Hale Initiative, journalists, and even Officer Derek Nolan, seated quietly at the back. General Locke stood beside Marcus, silver hair catching the sun, nodding once in silent respect. Marcus began softly, voice carrying just enough to reach everyone without breaking the stillness. "When I was a Marine, we were taught that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting in spite of it. Back then, I thought courage was about survival, but the last few years taught me something different." He paused, glancing at the graves. "Courage is choosing peace when pride begs for war. It's standing back up when the world misjudges you and still believing it's worth protecting." A breeze stirred through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a lone trumpet began to play taps. The haunting notes rolled across the cemetery, soft yet commanding, echoing through every quiet space in the crowd. After the ceremony, as people dispersed, Derek approached, His once shaven head was covered now with soft stubble, his posture humbled. "Sergeant Hale," he said quietly, "I wanted to thank you for not letting that night destroy us both." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then offered his hand. "We all carry something heavy, Derek. What matters is what we do with it." Nolan nodded, voice low. "I'm still learning." Marcus's hand tightened around his. "We all are." Later that afternoon, as the sun began to set, Marcus walked alone along the cemetery path. Children played nearby, their laughter faint but real, life continuing among the memories of sacrifice. He paused at one grave, saluted, and whispered the same words he'd said on battlefields long ago, "Semper Fi," always faithful. When he lowered his hand, he caught sight of something unexpected. A group of young recruits, fresh from his training program, standing quietly at a distance, saluting him back. Marcus smiled, a small, tired smile that carried the weight of peace. For the first time since that night in the parking lot, he felt no anger, no burden, only a quiet certainty that what he had built would outlast him. He turned toward the horizon, where the evening light met the flag fluttering gently in the wind. The colors glowed, red for courage, white for peace, blue for endurance, and as the camera of memory pulled back, wide, silent, eternal, one image remained, a man standing between two worlds, saluting both, proving that sometimes the greatest victory is not in fighting back, but in teaching others how not to fight at all.